Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Yarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
Christopher Wells.
We appreciate all the support and the recent content. We are moving through these off-season breakdowns. And before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so, initially we were, going to do a different team. But because of a trade that occurred, we're going to actually start off with this team, and that's the Minnesota Timberwolves. So, in case you are living under a rock or you haven't heard already, there was a big trade that happened over the weekend, and that was Karl Anthony Towns of the Minnesota Timberwolves going to the New York Knicks for Julius Randle, Dante DiVincenzo, and a protected first from the Detroit Pistons. And then also the Charlotte Hornets supposedly are going to be in the deal as a third team. They're going to be taking on Daquan Jeffries, maybe some other draft compensation. The trade is not finalized yet, so there's probably still some extra stuff that'll have to be put in there. Maybe by the time this episode comes out, it'll be done. We don't know, but those guys aren't going to be at media day. But either way, it's a big deal, right? Because obviously it's been a little bit while since we had a trade, right, of this magnitude in the NBA, right? Since, I guess earlier in the offseason, right? Or, even last season.
Hmm.
But kind of wild because I remember when the Timberwolves season ended and we were talking about the Minnesota Timberwolves and we were kind of saying like, yeah, long term Towns probably is going to be moved on from. We'd been saying that all year, and we also said that after they got eliminated. But we thought because they got to the conference finals and because he had played well before the Mavs series for the most part in the postseason, you thought maybe they're going to give it another year, right?
Mhm.
But they basically decided, no, we're going in a different direction. Part of that, I would say, is definitely the CBA for sure, just because of the fact that if you look at Karl Anthony Towns' contract, $49 million this year, $53 the next, $57, and then in 2027, 2028, a player option for $61 million. And it's very hard. Look at New Orleans with Brandon Ingram, right? And he'll probably be asking for a lot of money. It's just kind of difficult you know, to try to, in the modern era with this new CBA to have a guy like that making that much money, and it's not, a guy that ideally probably can't be the second best player on a championship team, right? Like, Jaylen Brown's contract is very high, but clearly it's worth it because we saw how he was able to play from start to finish over the course of the season, right? And but with Towns, it's tough, from Minnesota's perspective, but obviously, if you look at it from two different directions, when it first happened, I absolutely hated it for both sides. At first glance,
Yes.
because of the fact that, and maybe it's just kind of just like a little bit of a bias because I'm not a huge fan of either player,
Okay.
but I understand, but like after thinking about it, I can understand why both teams did it. Because from Minnesota's perspective, CBA long term, that's probably not going to work. With Towns and as your second best player, with him and Gobert and Edwards as well. Because we talked about it at some point. If you're Minnesota, you need to kind of get ready to reshape the roster towards Anthony Edwards. I don't necessarily know if Julius Randle is the ideal,
No.
co-star next to Edwards, just because of, certain parts of his style of play. But either way, you know, if you want to look at it from both sides, right? From the Knicks side, they didn't have a center, right? Even, obviously with Mitchell Robinson, he was already rumored to be out, and there's reports that he'll probably be out even longer than what was initially anticipated, which, again, unfortunately has been kind of the story for him for a little while. So, without him, I mean, your only other center options would either have been small ball Randall at the five, which again coming off a shoulder thing, and there's still not necessarily like a ton of confidence from people that he'll be completely 100% by the start of the season. But either way, outside of that, then it's Precious Achua and then Jericho Sims, right? Like third string guys, right? Like guys that you don't really want starting. Um, they're better as either backups or reserves. So, from that perspective, he's a center and he's a good one. And obviously, from the Knicks perspective, and this is more so a Minnesota offseason discussion, but just from the Knicks perspective, you get a center that can shoot. You're going to play five out. You've made some talent upgrades, but you do lose some depth. Because they've made different moves over the course of this season, right? They lost Hartenstein. They've now, I guess, moved on from Randall and DiVincenzo, but you did get some talent upgrades, right? Like Mikal Bridges is a better player than DiVincenzo, and Towns is a better player than either Randall or Hartenstein. So you got talent upgrades. It's just going to be interesting to see how those pieces fit. How does Towns respond to being in the New York market, right? Obviously, there's been reports about that this deal had kind of been in talks for a while. The sticking point was DiVincenzo. Also, reports from people covering the Knicks that DiVincenzo wasn't super thrilled about what his role would have probably been for the Knicks, where he's, probably going to be playing less, also as a backup, which is understandable. He had a really good season.
Very
So,
good. Very good.
again, it's also kind of funny just because Towns is reunited with Tibbs, right? He coached him back in Minnesota at different points, and things happened. But obviously they're at different points in their careers, so I'm sure stuff will probably hopefully be better. But for Towns, this is kind of a crossroads point, right? Because now he's been moved. He's no longer on the team that had drafted and developed him. He's on another team that's, trying to also compete and win right now. And, for the Knicks, for that New York market, right? If he plays well, as we know, right? The Knicks fans will love you, right? Because of the fact that they respect people that play hard and play well. But obviously, if he doesn't play well, it's going to be a major problem. But also for the Knicks, if it doesn't work out, it's going to be probably near impossible to move him because, just because of the fact that his contract will only be more and more expensive. And, you're not going to be able to necessarily probably swap him out for another all-star level guy like Randall. It would probably end up having to be a spare parts deal. So, again, it's a major gamble. And then from the Minnesota perspective, right? It's a gamble because of Randall, right? Obviously, he's another guy who's clearly a very good basketball player, right? He's been basically like a 20 and 10 guy the last several years, right? Last season, he gave you 24 and 9, right? Shooting 47 from the field. So and obviously 5 assists as well. So the difference is that creator wise, right? He's probably a better creator than Towns, right? With the ball in his hands as a passer playmaker. So that will obviously, I guess, can kind of unlock some stuff that Minnesota wants to do on offense. But it's still a very different type of offensive player, right? He is a more physical guy. So obviously you can probably play with a little bit more force offensively than what Towns would give you. But there's also a little bit of clunkiness there, right? Because of the fact that, he's a guy that's a lot more methodical, right? Plays at a little bit of a slower pace, plays more one-on-one basketball than Towns does. And that may clash a little bit with some of Minnesota's other offensive options. But, again, I guess a positive you could also look at it is no more 2 7-footers, right? So you'll probably be a little bit rangier on defense, right? I wouldn't necessarily say that Randall's a better defender than Towns, but he'll probably be easier. It'll probably be easier to have him switch on to other guys than Towns just because he's not a 7-footer. So that's nice. Also, I guess with Naz Reid, right, that makes Towns a little bit more expendable than he probably would have been otherwise, even though he's a much better player than Naz Reid. But at least Naz Reid can kind of do some of the things that Towns can do and, do it pretty well, especially with those second units. I'm sure he'll probably be able to play alongside either Randall or Gobert in different lineups as he's already done. And he might close, which I'm also kind of curious to see as well as, because I kind of saw online the idea from some Wolves fans that Naz Reid is going to start. And it's like, no, Randall's going to start. He's going to start and he's going to play a lot. We'll see if he always closes, but again, it's a different look. And then when you look at DiVincenzo, that's a good 3-and-D guy that can kind of come into the team. We saw him play big minutes and play a big role for the Knicks last year. So now it'll be a little bit more of a reduced role, but a role that's probably better suited for him. It also gives you some guard depth, another ball handler, possibly not really a point guard, but just a guy that can bring up the ball. Like he's better than Nickeil Alexander-Walker. So, there's some lineups where you could probably have him and Ant out there instead of just Conley and Ant. But again, you do lose some playmaking. But, the DiVincenzo piece, I think, is kind of what helps. If it was like just a straight up Towns and Randall swap, which wouldn't happen anyways because their contracts are different, right, then that would be a lot worse. But getting back DiVincenzo helps. You get a first, but it's a heavily protected first, so who even knows if they're really going to keep it. But, for Minnesota, right, obviously it shows you're going in a different direction. So, I don't really know, where you go from there. Obviously you have more flexibility, right? So the question is, again, Randall will have a player option at the end of the season that he can either opt in or out to. And then I guess, when you look at the Minnesota roster, Rudy Gobert will have a player option as well. So in theory, both of those guys could potentially opt out. And then, you either re-sign them or they walk. I doubt they would walk, but you know what I mean? Like, there for Minnesota, there's a little bit more flexibility there. Obviously, the ownership struggle, right, is still going on, right? It's still, the other previous guy still owns the team, if I'm not mistaken. So, just a lot of weird things going on there at different points, which, kind of unfortunately took away from, what was a really good season for them. But what do you think of this trade? Because, ultimately, when I kind of look at it, I don't necessarily know if I would say any of these teams are significantly better, more so just different. But I can also at the same time like see the vision of why these teams did what they did. And, again, from the Knicks talent perspective and then from the Wolves, it's a different look that may work a little bit better in the short term. But, what do you think of this ultimately? Because obviously this is a pretty significant deal going on here.
Yeah, it's crazy. Initially, like I'll start kind of like how you did with your initial thoughts, like spur of the moment kind of thing. I texted you. I was like, "Ew." I didn't really know what to think because,
Yeah.
like you said, it's not that I'm not really like negative on both players. I'm probably more negative on Julius Randle um than Karl Anthony Towns, but just like fit wise, like back when we talked about rumors of Cat even going to New York, we were like, probably not. Doesn't fit the culture that they've got going on
Mhm.
over there. But lo and behold, here we are. I kind of want to start with the Knicks perspective because I think that's the one I think that I value a little bit more and I'm higher on.
Yeah.
With the Knicks, I think their end game goal is to try and take out Boston, as is everybody else's goal in the East. And I think with a starting five with Karl Anthony Towns instead of whoever else it would have been, I think that elevates their chances of taking out Boston. So I like it for them. You give up DiVincenzo, who's a great player, and you get rid of Julius Randle, who kind of wasn't really the best fit, I guess, next to Brunson. And it does kind of suck because I think him and Tibbs did kind of start the foundation for the culture that they built. But
Mhm.
you have to move on from him. And I think, we talked about it. He wasn't like a liability. You could have kept him around and had a really good season, but there
Yeah.
was always that potential room for an upgrade. And like you talked about, there's no way that you can say that Karl Anthony Towns is not a direct upgrade talent wise, over Julius Randle. So that's kind of how I feel about it, looking at it from the Knicks perspective. But Minnesota, I think, is the tough one to gauge. Like you said, I think this one was more so CBA motivated for sure. I think they're trying to give themselves some flexibility to, build around Anthony Edwards in a better way. Because you look at the money that Towns is owed, it's a lot. It's way too much, I think, for what Minnesota was kind of gearing up for. And I like the identity that they had last year, where you had two twin towers that kind of just were
Yeah.
there to take out Denver. But that kind of felt like their Super Bowl because then you look at the next series and they kind of got torn apart. And then it didn't
Right.
help that Towns, not gonna say he was a no show, but he's not the regular season numbers. We
Right.
know that in the
You're back.
playoffs, yeah, in the playoffs he's a faller, which sucks. That's another thing for New York. That's one question mark that I do have is does he elevate in the playoffs or does he stay, relatively the same as the regular season or does he fall once again? Who knows? But in the West, it's tough because you have to fight so many factors. In the East, it's really okay. You're looking to take out Boston. That's really it. Like as long as you can get to Boston and take them out, you're guaranteed pretty much a trip to the NBA Finals. But in the West, you've got so much competition and so many skilled players. It's too tough. So veering away from that identity, I guess, is interesting from the perspective of, all right, Denver's not the Super Bowl anymore. We know that we could take them out, yada, yada, yada. But now Karl Anthony Towns isn't on the team anymore. You bring in Julius Randle, who could potentially be a very clunky fit. But at the same time, that contract is kind of looking interesting because I think, he'll be an expiring deal next year, right?
He's got a player option at the end of this season, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Like if you look at his contract, he's for this upcoming season, 28 million, and then after that, 2025, 2026 is the player option.
Okay. Yeah. So like money wise, I think it helps you out a lot. Like you're just not
Yeah.
committing to Karl Anthony Towns if he has another bad postseason, which
Right.
I think we can all assume he probably would have. And then you get DiVincenzo, which adds some depth as well. It's really just tough to gauge though, because I think it's a head scratcher for a lot of people because they're like, well, they just made the conference finals. Anthony Edwards is so young, they could have ran it back. What if they go back to the conference finals or go even farther? But at the same time, they're just giving themselves some flexibility there because Towns would have just bogged the team down, I think, not in terms of his play style, but financially. I don't think this was a play style or numbers thing. I think this was more so money motivated.
Yeah, it was
Too expensive. Too expensive. Because then you had Gobert too. That was another problem. But the problem with the Towns contract, it's kind of like, look at Beal and Levine's contract. Like, those were pre-new CBA, so you couldn't really see this coming. But it is what it is. I'm still not torn, but I'm still puzzled a little bit just from both sides because I didn't see it coming, and that's how surprising it is.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think you can really say that it's a bad trade though. I would give it a good grade if that makes sense. And I do like it from both perspectives, but I don't know. There's something off here. It's weird, like you said. It's just, I think the main thing that I am struggling with is the fact that they just made the conference finals and they blew it up. That's why I'm like, the only way that I can rationalize that is that it's money motivated.
Yeah, because like I can see the Knicks trying to make some splashy moves, because they lost in the second round, could have made the conference finals if they were healthy, but clearly they're like continuing to already build on things. But with the Wolves, like it felt like they were after kind of years and years of with this well, not years and years, but like say the year before with that same group, like they went out in the first round. Obviously there were injuries involved,
Sure,
right? But the year before didn't really look as promising. Then they completely flipped it around. Then we all thought, oh wow, they might go to the finals and win the title. And then no, that didn't happen at all.
Not at all.
So, so so I think like the Dallas series probably kind of gave us a reality check of there's probably a little bit more of a ceiling to that group. And it was just wild because I wish we could have seen it coming, because I think we both kind of agreed that at a certain point Minnesota was going to move on from Towns. We just didn't expect it to happen now. We thought that it might happen maybe a year from now, right? Like let's say, like you said, anything happens next season, maybe they like take one step back. Like not that they're significantly worse, but maybe they don't make the conference finals, but they go out like in the second round. Right. Then I could see then you could easily see like, all right, we're kind of done here. But, after making the conference finals, it feels like you don't normally see a team make moves like that, right? I mean, obviously, like to be fair, the Celtics did, but their situation was a little bit different because their two core guys are not quite as young as Edwards. So you don't have, so in theory, you might say like, okay, they don't have quite as much time together as Edwards might. But either way, it's a bizarre trade, but it's funny because, like I said, I initially went from not liking it for either team to now I can understand why both teams would do it. I would still probably lean more towards the Knicks, but I can't fault Minnesota for doing it. I'm just very curious to see what it actually looks like on the court, because on paper, and we're gonna actually look into what the Wolves have done this offseason, what their roster is gonna be like. On paper, it seems like a very bizarre pairing and fit, but. But again, Randall is a good player. It's just, again, kind of like Towns, it feels like he has a little bit of a ceiling to his game once you hit, the highest levels of competition, right?
Yeah.
And I think Randall's numbers seem worse than Towns, but I guess the first year, to be fair, it wasn't a great Knicks team, and Randall's the number one option, right? So I mean, so that's where things are a little bit different. But either way. We'll see what happens, because you never know, right? Because like it seemed like Ant maybe unlocked some stuff from Towns in the first two rounds. He was good, and then of course, then everybody turned into pumpkins basically in the conference finals. Even Edwards wasn't really that great. But I don't know. I mean, because it's not like Randall's old or anything, right? But I feel like he's probably at a point where he's probably at his peak, right? Where he's probably not going to be better than what he is right now, which is still really good. But now I guess you know before we get into the Minnesota thing,
Yeah.
does this change your view on what you think the Knicks ceiling could be? Like, do you feel stronger about they have a real chance to beat Boston than you did before this deal, or about the same, or a little bit worse?
I'm high on the Knicks, highest I've ever
Oh,
been. It's a sick move. I think, like I said, I'm not like I'm not a Towns glazer, but I'm not a Towns hater if that makes sense. Like I'm pretty neutral on him. So it's not like I
mhm,
think he's a horrible player. I think he elevates their ceiling offensively tremendously.
mhm,
And he's low key versatile in terms of, being able to play the 4 and the 5. So that
mhm.
kind of gives you some opportunities to be like, okay, well, we also have Mitchell Robinson. So maybe we can play, we can go big and we can also, not go small, but also have Karl Anthony Towns at the center position as well. Because I think what the Knicks did, they addressed the void. And the cool thing is, it seems like they'd been teeing this up for a while. It all makes sense now looking back on it. It's almost like they had foresight. Um, Jalen Brunson takes a huge pay cut. You bring in McCall Bridges. He's not on a super duper expensive deal. He's going to be soon, but as
Yeah.
of right now, no. So capitalize on it. The problem is it's a gamble. It's a gamble that I
Yeah.
like, but it's still a gamble because if you go out kind of sad in the next couple of
Mhm.
years, then you're locked into this for what? At least 4 or 5 years. So
Yeah.
that's going to be the rough part. But the cool thing is Boston kind of proved to us that you don't necessarily need a top 5 player, maybe to win a
Mhm.
chip. You just need a collective, um, team and unit and a good system. So I think if the Knicks can kind of replicate that in terms of having Jalen Brunson, Bridges, and then the other guys, and then adding in Towns and filling that center void. Yeah, for sure. Because I think, not saying that Towns matches up against Porzingis very well, but I think he stretches the floor just as good, if not better, than Porzingis. So that adds that 5-out aspect that they were 100% lacking,
Yeah.
last year.
Right, and that's how I look at it too. Because again, like even though I'm not a huge Towns fan, I think he can help this team from the perspective of like you get 3-point shooting from your big, like you said, that can match up with Boston. You can play pick and pop or roll with him. I had even thought about too, right, the ability of okay, well in Minnesota he kind of learned how to coexist alongside Gobert. So maybe there's an opportunity where if Mitchell Robinson ever plays, maybe they can actually put them at a 4 or
Yeah.
5 together, and then also the wings alongside Brunson and
And
Towns,
he
right?
doesn't
You
need
can
the
have those.
ball.
Yeah, and he doesn't need the ball too. So that's kind of where he meshes offensively, probably better than Randall. Where even though
Yes.
he's not the creator that Randall is, right? It feels like the Knicks are going on this heliocentric Brunson team where
Yes.
he's got the ball in his hands by and large because he's
Good.
very good at it, and the other guys can make plays with the ball in their hands, but they're much better as finishers. And then, that's where, a Towns can play off of Brunson, like you said, probably better than Randall could.
Yeah.
And then, he can, even if he's at the 5 as not a strong defender, he's still a big guy. And you also have the other dirty work guys around him too. So that can probably, help. It's just I'm just curious about the depth factor, just because now when you look at the bench, right, it's like McBride, I guess Mitchell Robinson if he ever plays, right? Is it Landry Shamet? Cameron Payne.
You think Hart
Um,
Hart comes off the bench, or do you think he starts?
uh, I feel like he's probably gonna start because I'm gonna assume that they're gonna have Bridges at the 2, and then Hart, Anunoby, and Towns. I'm gonna assume because Robinson
Wow.
isn't gonna be playing at all unless they start, one of the other guards like Shaman or McBride. But I feel like that's probably gonna be the starting 5.
Yeah, that's where the DiVincenzo factor does hurt a lot, I feel
Mhm.
like. And
Yeah, because now
it sucks that the freaking Nova boys got broken up
we
before they
didn't even
even
get to
played a
see it.
freaking game.
Yeah, we were
All
talking about
right,
that
cool.
um when we were talking about our Knicks offseason video that we did, of course, way before this trade.
Way before then.
And we were excited about that. And we were like, yeah, these guys have been playing together a lot in college and big games. So that should help boost the chemistry. And then we didn't even get to see a game
Nope.
of it. To be fair, DiVincenzo was always going to be the one that if one of them were to be traded, it would be him.
Yeah.
Because he's the one that's, the lead, not as good as the other ones.
Yeah.
Right? Like they're all good, but he would be the least good, I guess, of the
that's fair.
of those guys.
Fair
Right?
assessment.
I guess, depending on how you view him and Josh Hart, right? Like they're probably in a similar-ish tier, but Hart's contract is also pretty good. And he plays the wing more than DiVincenzo does, even though he's undersized. But for Hart, he's gonna have to shoot threes better. Obviously you're swapping DiVincenzo with Towns, right? So Towns can give you that 3-point boost. Bridges, we'll see. Now you don't really have as many movement shooters. It's more like catch and shoot guys. So I'm curious to see how that looks. But, I think they'll still be really good. They just got to be healthy. I mean, that's kind of the issue. And even with a guy like Towns, he's had some injury issues the last couple of seasons, including a meniscus tear this past season. And then obviously Robinson, he's not healthy. So what do they do with him? I have no clue. So, and, there's not like any more players where it's like, oh, this is an obvious player to move now to bring in somebody else. This is kind of the team. Maybe there'll be some small trades, or something like that, which, again, to be fair, that's kind of the spot you want to be in. You don't want to have to put yourself going into the season of like, all right, we just need to hold on as long as we can and then make a move at the deadline. No, like ideally you want to already have your team pretty much set before the season starts so that way you can assess and then make whatever minor moves you need to make. I like a Boston, right, where they got Xavier Tillman, and that was a guy that helped them win a playoff game, right? But they didn't make any major deals, right? Most of the championship teams don't really do that. Usually it's smaller ones, if any at all, right? Like the Warriors, when they won the title, didn't do anything. I don't think the Nuggets did anything either. Milwaukee, I think, traded for PJ Tucker, right? The Lakers, they got Dion Waiters and Markieff Morris in the buyout market. And, before that, the Raptors, I guess, traded for Marc Gasol. So, but either way, just like in general, you don't usually make big moves. So, if you're the Knicks, that's your big move. So now we have to see if that works.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, kind of the short version, I guess Minnesota, they traded Towns before he became untradeable. Look at Ingram, like nobody wants him. And then the Knicks, they're gambling and going all in, even further than I thought that they freaking could, honestly. But the writing was on the wall. We were just all blind to it.
Yeah, exactly. And you do kind of wonder, like, if there was a scenario where, like, maybe another team was thinking about swooping in. So maybe that's why. Because the Knicks, it seemed like, didn't want to initially trade DiVincenzo.
Right.
But then maybe somebody else came along. Who knows? Maybe we'll know more about it. But either way,
even like Pelicans, like the Pelicans, I thought, like, looking back on it, it makes sense. They kind of did a similar, not a similar thing, but a little similar to what the Knicks did, where, you get rid of some quality centers, whatever, let them walk. You bring in some other guys at skill positions, and then you create that void, and you maybe want to hope and get off a guy that's maybe undesirable and bring him in. Like, I saw some people were like, oh, the Pelicans should have traded for him. And it's like, maybe, but nobody wanted Brandon Ingram. That's the difference. It's, Brandon Ingram versus Julius Randle in terms of their contract is very different. So,
yeah. And then also, I guess, if you're Minnesota, I mean, or I guess if you're Minnesota, you'd be trading for Brandon Ingram. And, I guess
it's trifling, bro.
How do you feel about that versus like Randall and DiVincenzo? I mean, DiVincenzo might be kind of the deal breaker, like in the sense of like that might put it over the top. Whereas like some people maybe they feel like you'd rather have Ingram than Randall. Maybe some might feel that way.
I was surprised that Towns didn't go for like picks too. That was interesting. I thought some picks would have been involved, because normally when guys like that are traded, about 3 picks, 2 or 3 picks.
Yeah, I guess it's because of the players that were moved. Like, it wasn't like you traded a bunch of role players. Like, Julius Randle is an all-star. So, like when Gobert got all those picks, traded for him, it wasn't like Minnesota did a swap for a similar caliber player, right? It was more so like some younger guys, some mid-level players. It wasn't like it was Gobert for, some other, all-star level guy.
Right, right, right.
So that's probably where that comes from, right? So it's like it was Randall, so who's an all-star, plus DiVincenzo, who's a good role player. So
Yeah. W trade, man.
but
W trade.
yeah, but if we look at Minnesota's, off season, right? Obviously, we've already talked about them a little bit, right? But obviously last season they won 56 games, third in the Western Conference. They were the number one defensive team. They were 16th on offense, third in net rating, right? So obviously they had a really good regular season. That number one seed came down to the wire, but in the end they ended up losing out because they lost to the Phoenix Suns twice
Mm-hmm.
in the span of a couple of about a week or so.
Mm-hmm.
And then they went into the playoffs and then basically smashed them,
Mm-hmm.
right? So just kind of wild, right? Edwards kind of took, the league by storm with his postseason play, right? So they basically rammed through the Suns. Then they go against the Nuggets, right? 7-game series, quote unquote back and forth, but almost every game was a blowout by and large, which was, really funny. And then you had the weird game 7 where they're down 20 in the plus in the third quarter, make a huge comeback, and I think kind of shockingly pull off the upset in game 7 to take out the defending champs. And then we're all basically on board saying like this team is going to win the title. And then they go against the Mavs, and then they take us back to reality. So then they lose in 5. They look kind of flustered. They look kind of disorganized. They looked a little bit like, like you said, it was their Super Bowl. And even though the games were close and competitive, you pretty much knew what was going to happen in the end, that Luka and Kyrie were going to figure it out. It was going to happen. So obviously, moving on from that, right? When you look at the Minnesota Timberwolves this time around, they did make some moves, and I think they made way more moves than we were expecting. Because I think our impression was that they would probably run it back, but maybe swap out a couple of bench guys, right? But instead, they ended up making some relatively significant deals. Obviously, first off, right, we have the Towns and Randall deal, right, where Towns is out, Randall and DiVincenzo are in, right? So we know Julius Randall, we've already talked about him, right? 20 and 10 guy, basically, right? 24 and 9 last year. Good scorer, good offensive player, good rebounder, good creator, passer, playmaker. Not a great defender, but he is a strong guy. So positionally, he can bother some guys in the post. And also not a great 3-point shooter. 33 for his career. And the last 3 seasons, he's been at 31%, 34%, and 30.8%. He shot over 40% on threes his second year with the Knicks, I think. Yeah, his second year with the Knicks. And that was the year that they went to the playoffs and lost in the first round to Atlanta. And that was also the year he was an all-star and, most improved. So he had a really good year. But it's a weird fit because both him and Edwards, they want the ball in their hands. They need the ball in their hands, to be at their best. And it feels like they might possibly get in each other's way. And from the Randall perspective, it's not as clean of a fit because of the fact that he doesn't shoot that well. So, I do kind of wonder what that looks like. To be fair to Randall, it seemed like before he got hurt, he was kind of trying to adjust to how to play, next to Brunson, and also OG Anunoby and everyone else on that team, right? And you give him credit for that. So obviously he's going into a situation now where it's like, yeah, this is not my team, right? It's not like the Knicks where it was his team, then Brunson comes in and takes it from him. He's going into the situation where this is not your team, buddy. So you assume he takes a step back, not in terms of numbers, but just in terms of like understanding, the assignment and what the role is. Again, I think defensively, positionally, right, it'll be a little bit rangier just because, like, Randall will probably be able to guard forwards a little bit better than Towns can. But it's going to be interesting, right? Because say against a team like Denver, right, now, because before you had Towns mostly on Jokic when it was Towns and Gobert in there, and then Gobert is just kind of roaming around the middle, right? But now I guess you could have Randall on Jokic. Obviously he's a little bit shorter, but he is a strong guy. So I'm curious to see how that works. You still have Naz Reid, to be fair. But either way, you look at that, and then you also look at what else they did. They in the draft, right? Which was initially the first part that I think kind of took us by surprise. Because they drafted Rob Dillingham, right? Or they traded for Rob Dillingham from the San Antonio Spurs for future picks. And he was the 8th overall pick, right? We talked about him, little guard from Kentucky. Should be a good offensive player. We don't know what he's going to look like defensively. Probably not very
We
good.
know. We know.
Yeah, but yeah, probably not very good. Ideally, coming into this situation, there's going to be good defenders around him. Hopefully, he can be, a spark plug guy off the bench. And then they also drafted Terrence Shannon Jr., right, who was a guy who had a lot of stock for him, but obviously some off the court stuff that was proven to, be wrong or whatever, right? Kind of hurt him initially, hurt his stock a little bit.
Mhm.
Um, and he was, showed out in the summer league, right? Seems like he's going to be a solid two-way guy. We'll see. Obviously, he's an older rookie, so that's something that should be a positive where he should be able to help right away. Kyle Anderson's gone, and in his place is Joe Ingles, right? So that's going to be kind of funny, him and Conley and Gobert reuniting, but I don't know how much he's got left in the tank at this point because he is 37, and he was all right for Orlando, but didn't play a ton down the stretch. Brought in PJ Dozier as well, right? He had some promise in Denver, but he had some injuries since then, so we'll see what he looks like. But, all in all, they had some good picks in the draft. Obviously, we don't know how they're going to contribute this season, right? Probably not at a super high level. But down the road, you never know. And then, at least for the playoffs, for the regular season, they might, do something, but we don't know. Either way, but then other than that, you have the big Randall deal where you got him and DiVincenzo. So, they're set up to still probably be really good, right? Like, I have them at a B plus for the offseason, mainly because the Randall element is kind of strange, but I like the DiVincenzo deal because it adds extra depth, right? It gives you an extra guy in your rotation that I think, ideally needed, that I don't think would have been good if they just ran it back with this roster, but swapped out Kyle Anderson for Joe Ingles and then Rob Dillingham and Terrence Shannon. I don't think that would have been amazing. But, it's kind of odd because, like I said, I feel like overall, I don't necessarily know if I feel like they're going to be better. I think the main thing is that with Edwards, his ascension can kind of help them be better. But at the same time, I don't know if Edwards and Randall together I don't necessarily see them getting to the finals. I mean, I'm sure there's a pathway where depending on what teams they play, they could get there. But either way, it doesn't the Randall part is kind of second fiddle to the Edwards piece. Because as long as he continues to improve and continues to get better, they're still going to be one of the top teams in the Western Conference. It's just a matter of now the roster has shifted somewhat. So guys are going to have to probably adjust on the fly. And it's probably going to be a little bit of a transition for them because they've been playing the same way for, a few seasons now. And now they're going to have to shake it up, right? Obviously, it's a major shakeup because one of your core key guys is gone. And in his place are some different guys. But long run, it might be better just because of the fact that you got off the Towns deal. And worst case scenario, you'll have more flexibility, right? Randall is still a good player where it's better to have that than basically just swap Towns for a bunch of mediocre, role bench guys or whatever, right? You got back a legitimate all-star and a solid role player, which is all you could really ask for in the deal, even though it is kind of a clunky fit. And then you had some good picks in the draft. We'll just have to see what they look like down the road because it feels like now at least you kind of have a little bit of your future guys set up with Edwards, possibly Dillingham, probably McDaniels, and then I guess Naz Reid, right? And then the other guys outside of that, like Randall and Gobert, we'll see. Those are maybe guys where it's 3-4 years from now, are they still going to be on the team? Maybe, but probably not. Maybe Randall because of his age, but Gobert probably not. So, we'll see what it looks like. But either way, regardless, they should still be pretty good. I don't really expect them to go from, what they were last season to oh, now they're a 6, 7, 8 seed and they're just going to suck. But I have my doubts a little bit on whether or not I expect them to win the title. You know what I mean? Not I guess it wouldn't surprise me if there was just a little bit of regression. Not necessarily that they go from holy crap, this team can win the title to oh, they suck now. But more so it wouldn't surprise me if maybe they go in the second round, they go against some really good team and then they just end up losing. And then you go from there and then next summer is where you kind of really start to see them do whatever they need to do to concoct a really good roster around Edwards, ideally. But we don't know because the ownership is in flux, or we thought it was in flux, but it might not be. And then obviously, everything else is kind of weird. But to be fair, right, it seems like Connolly, right, the GM, he seems like he's really good at what he does. So I think he's got a little bit of grace, because it is a strange move. But everybody thought the Gobert move was a strange move, and it ended up being fine, I guess. Right, like it's still an overpay, but they had the most successful season they've had in 20 years, so in franchise history. So overall, good off season. I'm just curious to see if they're going to if they're going to get to the finals, because they went to the conference finals last year. So if you're going to be better than you were last year, that means the NBA finals. Doesn't necessarily have to mean championship, but we'll see.
Yeah, I don't think they go to the NBA finals.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
I I don't think that I don't think they got, like you said, significantly worse, but I definitely don't think they got significantly better, if that makes
No,
any sense. I think
it's just
Anthony
different.
Edwards,
Like it's just different.
yeah, I think Anthony Edwards will have gotten significantly better even from
Hmm.
last year, which, I think is 100% possible. But yeah, I love this offseason for the Minnesota Timberwolves because, there's so many players around the league. I'm not going to name them, but we all know who they are, that they're on these crazy freaking deals, like, max deals, making a crap ton of money when they really should be making 25, 35 million dollars. Um and now all those teams are stuck with them. So shout out to Minnesota for being able to finagle their way out of having one of those situations. Because I feel like that would have come back to bite them. Because like I said,
Hmm.
I think if you run that team back, they don't go to the NBA Finals, and somebody's going to have to take the blame for it, whether it be the
Yeah.
coach, whether it be Anthony Edwards, and we all know who the guy is going to be. It would be Karl Anthony Towns or Gobert. One of those two is going to get the freaking brunt of everything. So move on from one of your scapegoats, the guy that you would have had to have paid a crap ton of money and would have been an unmovable guy, just like Brandon Ingram. W. That's a solid like A automatically for me. I think in terms of trade, you maybe don't like what you got back, but that's not the point. The point is to get away from that. Um,
Hmm.
Draft 100% an A. Um, you know, weaker draft, but you came out on top with Terrence Shannon Jr., who seems to
Yeah.
be, a solid athlete. Can definitely do some stuff defensively as well. And then Rob Dillingham, who could potentially be your franchise PG. And the cool thing about it, we talked about it, I think two episodes ago or something like that. I can't remember, but with bridge quarterbacks in the NFL, you're kind of seeing the vets, hand over the keys to the young guys. So if Mike Conley can kind of transfer some wisdom to Rob Dillingham, I think you've got yourself a good, solid future offensive starting point guard. Um, and yeah, to be able to trade for him was really cool as well. So shout out, and you didn't have to give up like a crap ton of stuff. So
It's your
that's
pick. That's it.
yeah, that's a W. I can't hate on that at all. And then like you said, all the other signings and stuff like that, you know, I wouldn't say crazy, but solid. Joe Ingles, vet. You did
Yeah.
lose Kyle Anderson, Monte Morris as well, but are we really going to miss them? Probably not. And
Maybe
you
Anderson, at least regular season wise, but
sure,
I don't think Monte Morris.
sure, but then you have a lot of talent on the roster, anyways, and I guess we're kind of looking for some more progression as well because the cool thing about Nas Reed is he can replicate some of the things that Towns did pretty
Yep.
well, like shooting and stretching the floor mainly, and he can do some stuff with the ball as well. And then you have to talk about it, which would be Julius Randle and Dante DiVincenzo now being brought into the fray. I think DiVincenzo's awesome. 3-and-D guy will help you crash the rebounds, all that stuff. So W in that sense. Randall, that's the one that's iffy. He's kind of like I guess, the casualty that you kind of have to take on because you don't get this move without him. So he'll be there. That's kind of
Yeah.
what I have to say about that. Like
Still
I'm
exist.
yeah, he'll be there. He'll be on the team. Um Not an upgrade by any means from Towns, for sure a downgrade. Like you said, potentially clunky fit because not a great 3-point shooter. You couple that with Gobert, can't shoot at all. Anthony
Hmm.
Edwards, you know,
Yeah.
I think he has the 3 ball, but it's not the greatest in the world. So you've kind of got three guys that are not the best 3-point shooters. So that's going to be rough, I feel like, but they'll work through it. I think they'll figure it out. And like you said, Julius Randle's going to have to adapt because he's not number one. He's number two, no pun intended. But at the end of the day, I think it's not the end of the world for Minnesota. Like you said, they're going to be able to move on from him eventually if they want to. Because say he has a great season, you could justify maybe keeping him around. But like I said, main thing was getting away from Karl-Anthony Towns. They did that, and they upgraded in the draft. So, A for me.
I mean, again, for Randle, as a creator, right, like, that's where he could be, like, an upgrade offensively over Towns because of the fact that he can play with the ball in his hands a little bit more, and that's something that Minnesota probably needs more of. It's just, ideally, he's probably not the guy you really want creating. But either way, that's kind of what you have to do, right? Because, like, outside of Edwards, you don't really have another creating guard, right? Like DiVincenzo, I guess, at times, but ideally, you'd rather him kind of playing off of other guys. And then Conley, I mean, is a fossil at this point. So, I mean, I mean.
That's why the Rob Dillingham thing makes me hyped for the team.
Right. Exactly.
You can somehow transfer it and do a nice, good, passing of the torch. All right, cool.
Like, essentially, if they didn't do what they did in the draft, like, the letter grade would probably be a lot worse. I mean, obviously, it also helps that they did this deal right before, we, got on to record the day afterwards, because if their offseason had just been run it back, but, run it back, but swap out Kyle Anderson with like Joe Ingles, like that probably wouldn't have been super ideal. But getting what you got in the draft, plus, getting something from out of towns, or something from 4 towns, right, where it's Randle and DiVincenzo, that helps. Because, again, regardless, if he plays well, you can keep him. If he doesn't play well, maybe you move on from him. And he's got a player option, so there's not a guarantee that he opts out, right? Because, there were other guys that we thought might opt out this past offseason, and that didn't, right? Like guys like D'Angelo Russell. We thought he might opt out, and he didn't. And that's because nobody really wanted to trade for him. So, or sign him to any money, right? Not trade for him, but you know what I mean. Sign. Well, nobody wanted to trade for him either, I guess. But either way,
rough spot.
But regardless, like for Minnesota, they'll be fine, right? Like I said, I don't expect them to be in the finals, and it wouldn't shock me if they don't make the conference finals either. But I think they could they'll still be a contender. They'll still be in the mix. But
it might unlock Anthony Edwards, though. Like, to be fair, because the problem is it's kind of contradictory to say that because Towns didn't necessarily need the ball, but he still got the ball. That's the thing that kind of irked me. But now you have brought in a player that needs the ball, and he's gonna get the ball too. So I don't know.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how it works. But again, it could be fine. It's just like I said, I don't expect them personally to make the finals. And also, like with Edwards, he'll have to continue to develop as well, right? Like he's got some work to do, right? Because he wasn't particularly great in the conference finals either. Yeah. But hopefully what he was able to do in the Olympics, hopefully that helps. And again, either way, guys this young usually don't win a title at this age anyways, so he's got plenty of time. It's just Minnesota's going to have to continue to, develop that group around him. It's just the question is, will they be able to, right? So with Dillingham, hopefully that can be your future point guard. You already got McDaniels. You already have Naz Reid. Obviously, you have Edwards. So we'll see what they do future-wise. And that's why, like I said, I think this season is more like a transitional year where they'll still be good. They'll still win a lot of games. But I don't think the goal this year for them is the title. Like
no, not at all.
I don't think the organization feels that way.
It's
maybe
clear.
The front office does, maybe some of the players do, but I don't think so.
This is a financial year.
Yeah, I think it's a transitional year.
Yeah,
where we'll see what it looks like, and then after that, we'll go from there. So that's how I look at that. We'll see. But either way, I guess the other question is so if you're the Denver Nuggets, how do you feel about this? Because there's 2 different ways you could feel if you're the Nuggets, because you could look at it as, all right, one of those big 7-footers is gone, so maybe we might have a better chance. But then there's also an alternative where you could look at it like, wow, the Minnesota Timberwolves made a move without us really being in mind. So maybe they don't even really view us as that big of a deal anymore. But I guess the question is, which one is probably closer to the correct answer, even if neither are necessarily right?
I would say they're probably happier, if anything. Um,
Okay.
I I don't think Denver saw Minnesota as a Super Bowl. You know that I just don't I don't think that's how they rolled. Theirs was obviously the Lakers, but with that, I think it's more so of like they got rid of Towns. Now nobody's gonna be able to check Jokic like as a unit. I don't see Nas Reed and Gobert being able to replicate that. Definitely not Randall and Gobert either. So I think it's gonna be tough. I think the Nuggets, not gonna say their chances just like skyrocketed, but
Hmm.
I think they definitely move up a spot in terms of, going back to the NBA finals for me. Because
Like
I
you would
think
take like
I would take them over I would take Denver over Minnesota.
I think I would too.
Yeah, just because of the fact that now Jokic can kind of go back to, dominating
Yeah.
because
And
there's
funny
nobody
enough,
that's
now
going to be able
they're
to guard
also
him.
yeah, and funny enough, now they're kind of in underdog status, but obviously we'll save that for our,
Yeah,
Denver discussion or whatever. But
yeah,
just kind of a question because obviously, initially that group was kind of put together to beat Minnesota, and now they're pivoting away from that. And the rest of the league is kind of, just done their thing, right? Like
yeah.
OKC's, and we'll talk about these teams obviously, but when you look at Minnesota's over under, they're at 52 and a half.
Mm-hmm,
Now they won 56 games last season.
mm-hmm.
So that essentially means Vegas expects them to be a little bit worse. And I'm going to assume that these numbers are updated
Right,
post
right. That's what I was going to
now
ask.
because I know that their title odds and everything for all these teams have been updated. So they expect them to be worse, basically, than last year. But not like significantly. Like standings wise, they have them as number 2 in the West. But
Okay.
the difference is OKC's way ahead. So I guess the question is like that basically is kind of what we're saying is they're probably still going to be a top 3, 4 seed. It's just the question is, are they going to be, success wise more successful than they were last year? And that's where I would say probably not. But I guess the question is, do you think over or under?
Under. I think they win 51. That would be
Okay.
like my spot on prediction. Kind of
Mhm.
right where the Clippers were last year. So around that 4 seed.
Yeah, I think I would say under too, because I feel like there's going to be more good teams in the West anyways.
Right, right.
So I don't know if I'm going to expect a team to win 60 games. And nobody in the West won 60 games last year, anyways. I think the
Yeah,
closest was OKC, who won 57.
yeah.
But, with more good teams in the Western Conference, it'll probably be a little bit harder to get to 60. So I feel like it wouldn't surprise me if we saw more teams in the low 50s. So I could see,
Exactly.
that being an under, but, much higher than like that. I don't know. I feel
Yeah.
like 52, 53 is probably the ceiling
Yep.
unless everything goes right with that deal.
Even then, I don't see it.
Yeah, yeah.
Just
So
I
you
don't
would
think
need,
Randall translates
yeah,
to a whole lot of wins, especially if
you
you're
would need an
downgrading.
you would either need like you would need either one of the rookies to be insanely good year one,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't think is going to be the case. Not that they'll be bad, but I don't expect them to be, superstar production level.
Yeah, like 20
Or
point per game scores,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Or you need maybe McDaniels to take another step forward, but he might just kind of be what he is. At this
Offensively, I think he's not cooked, but very limited.
Yeah, like I don't see him really ever being like a go-to offensive guy. Like,
No.
it really just depends on can he hit shots on a given night or not. When he hits more of his shots, then that's when he looks much better on offense. And if not, that's when he looks bad. Because that happened in
Mm-hmm.
the playoffs.
Yep.
So, but yeah, so either way, I mean, what a deal, what a move, what a situation these teams are in. And just kind of goes to show, kind of the craziness in the NBA, just because of the fact that, you know, these type of things can happen. And they always seem to happen when you least expect it. Now, again, this kind of stuff behind the scenes obviously is constantly going on, but we don't know about it. And obviously, with Woj out of the picture, until people kind of until these organizations kind of figure out who's going to be the top dogs now. It's probably going to be like that because we got like Shams, I think, was the initial guy that broke it, but there was also information coming out from other people as well.
Yeah,
Like you
yeah.
got little bits and pieces from multiple people at ESPN, like Ramona Shelburne, Bobby Marks, I think what's his name, Tim Bontemps as well, and others. So
Mhm,
even like a Ian Begley who works for who doesn't work for ESPN. I don't think
mhm.
he works for like a local New York thing.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
so again, let us know your thoughts on, the Minnesota Timberwolves, in terms of what your expectations are for the team. What are your thoughts on the trade? What are your thoughts on the Rooks and things like that? Because again, there's, a decent amount to break down here relative to I think what we would have expected for them going into the summer. But
yeah.
now, in terms of news around the league, right? So McCall going to wait for his New York extension. McCall Bridges expected to seek long-term deal with the Knicks during the 2025 offseason, which is like you kind of hinted at what we expected. This is from Bobby Marks from the Hoop Collective podcast. It makes sense because again, we already know with Brunson taking that pay cut, those other guys probably might. I don't know if they're going to be pay cuts. Like they'll all make more than what they're making right now, but I don't know if they're going to automatically get the full max. But either way, him taking the pay cut makes it easier for all of them to get the full max. So everybody's probably going to be happy with whatever it is they end up getting.
Yeah, I think it,
And
it it all
OG has
makes
already
sense.
been paid. And
Yeah.
OG's already been paid, so McCall probably gets whatever his max is. Then I
Yep.
guess.
It all makes sense. It all makes sense.
Yeah.
And it goes back to the writing on the wall thing. So this
Yeah.
is very calculated.
Yeah, AJ Griffin quitting basketball. So, according to him on a podcast, he basically said that he made the decision to retire, to give up basketball, to follow Jesus, to serve God. So that's obviously he didn't.
W.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously, he said that he felt he was being called to let go of basketball and enter a new season in his life. Obviously, we know, he had a really good rookie year, didn't do as well this second year, right? And then obviously got traded to Houston, got bought out, and now
Yeah.
he's, I guess, on to the next stage of his life post NBA season. So we'll see. Hopefully, it works out for him.
Yeah, I mean it's an interesting story. I think the quote is pretty powerful. Like, because a lot of people I think were questioning like, can't you do both? But I think it speaks to what he wants to do and obviously what his calling is, and putting God first. I feel like is very important. So
Mhm.
shout out to him.
Yeah. Yeah. Moving on, Chris Middleton not fully cleared. Unfortunately, we got a bevy of injuries that have been reported.
Mhm.
And according to Chris Haynes, Bucks guard isn't cleared for 5-on-5 action when training camp started soon. So basically, like limited action during training camp, which doesn't really surprise me because again, he had off-season surgery on both ankles. So it's not really a shocker that he's not ready. It's just a matter of how much longer do you have to wait in order for him to get ready to play. Because if he's not clear for 5-on-5 yet, he still probably has a little ways to go. If that's
Like
the
what,
case, where
two
he
months,
may
right?
not be, yeah, I mean, I don't know if it'll be a few months, but like he may not be ready when the season starts. Because if he's
Yeah.
not still not ready to play 5-on-5, there's still going to need to be a little bit of time to get to that point before he actually gets back on the court. So at the very least, you probably won't see him in preseason
Yeah.
because preseason is going to start Friday.
Yeah. Which is coming up. Jeez.
Yeah, and in addition to that, some other injuries. Mark Williams, right, is going to be out for a little bit. And again, this is kind of the issue that
Oh
we talked
boy.
about with Charlotte, where, this is why we probably said under because of the fact that you can't count on these guys to stay healthy, unfortunately,
Nope.
right? And that's been a major problem for not just Mark Williams, but pretty much, I mean, everybody like on this Charlotte team. And that's the thing that kind of sucks because they have some talented guys, but, unfortunately, it just hasn't really, these guys haven't been able to stay on the floor, which is rough because, I would have kind of wanted to see, what a fully healthy Hornets team looks like. And again, like it's not like a situation where he's going to be out for months and months and months on end. It's just it's already rough that season hasn't even started, training camp hasn't started, and we already have a situation where a relatively significant player for this team is going to be out for at least reevaluated in 2 weeks. Strained tendon in his left foot.
Yeah, that's unfortunate because I think he could be such a bright spot for that team. But again, that injury bug just keeps finding its way back there. It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So, Devin Vassell, also another one, right, for the Spurs, right, where he's going to be out until at least November 1st. He had actually at the end of towards the end of last season, he was out with a foot issue. And we kind of just assumed that it was like, they're kind of mailing it in at the end of the season, but he ended up having to have surgery on that foot. It was a stress reaction in his foot. So, obviously it's going to take some time for him to come back because November 1st, I mean, that's like the first week of the season. But
Mhm.
my guess is that, okay, if it's out until at least November 1st, so that's like a reevaluation date. So it could be a little bit longer, right? So he may miss the first couple weeks of the season. And that's a guy that he's going to be in the first year of his big extension. So that's a guy that I think they're going to be relying on a lot. And that's definitely a blow to them. But hopefully he's not out for a significant period of time.
Yeah, they desperately need him. I think he's like one of their potential franchise cornerstones. Hence, why they extended him. He's talented with what he can do, with and without the ball in his hands. So
Yeah, I mean,
that's
you
going to
could
be a
say he's
huge
their
blow.
second best player.
Yeah, I think he is their second best player at this
Yeah.
point.
And then also Vince Williams for the Memphis Grizzlies, which is a guy that we literally just talked about.
Yeah.
That we thought could, take on the mantle after GG Jackson. Well, I mean, he would have played ahead of him anyways, but
Hmm.
we could be like, GG Jackson, he's gonna be out. But you got Vince Williams. So he's gonna be out too, at least 4 weeks. So yeah, and for Memphis, still having injuries, so that's not really a good sign. But
Yeah. Avoid that
it
at all
and it's
costs,
rough.
and they can't.
And it's rough because again, it's at the position that they can't really afford to lose a lot of these guys because they need their guys that can play the wing spots to play because they don't have a lot of natural wings. So these guys that can kind of play in between, they need them.
Yeah, that's going to be a huge blow, I feel like, more than people realize.
Yeah. And then after that, we also got a few extensions, right? So Jose Alvarado, he signed a 2-year, $9 million extension, so pretty inexpensive, basically $4.5 million. Honestly, a lot less than I would have expected. But not again, like I didn't expect him to get a crazy amount, but I certainly expected him to get more than $4.5 million. But either way, again, it's a good rotational guy for the Pelicans, two-way point guard. Um, and I mean, it's kind of a no-brainer. Getting a guy like that at that contract is pretty much a steal.
Yeah, it's a big time W. I think, it makes a whole lot of sense, especially considering the way that roster is constructed. So you need all hands on deck.
Yeah.
So yeah, W.
Then you also have Terrence Mann, right, also signing an extension with the Clippers as well, right? This has been part of the Clippers offseason where, they retained and re-signed a bunch of their other guys, but didn't retain and re-sign Paul George. But, for Terrence Mann, again, he's been a solid rotational guy for the Clippers, right? He's got, 3 years, 47 million, so not really anything wrong with that, right? I mean, you're basically talking about like 12-ish million a year. So, I mean, that's perfectly fine. It's just again, for the Clippers, and obviously we'll get to them when we get to them, right? But they lost the key guy in Paul George, so obviously all these other guys will stick around. But that's a team that I'm kind of worried about in terms of how good they're actually going to be.
Yeah, and I think the whole Terrence Mann thing is a W because I think that's talent that you really can't afford to lose out on in the long run. So, and I think he's
Mhm.
pretty versatile. But like you said, the Clippers I think are one of the most down bad franchises right now. So
Yeah. Um yeah, I mean ultimately, we'll see. And then last but not least, Heat signed Nasir Little. So Nasir Little back in the
woohoo,
NBA, on the Miami Heat. Again, personally I'm not a huge fan of his, but I understand again that he's a decent athletic wing that on paper, right, can provide some two-way versatility, but he just hasn't been able to stick yet. And I just feel like, a team like the Suns, him not being able to stick on the Suns would make me think, well, if he was really, really good, they would have kept him. But I also understand the thought process for the Suns of wanting more financial flexibility. So hopefully he'll get some opportunities to play with the Heat, because ideally they probably need some, solid two-way wings as opposed to, some of the guys, other wings that they have on the roster that kind of lean more towards offense outside of Jimmy. But either way, we'll see.
I mean, it could be like sneaky good for them because they do
Yeah,
have a tendency to rehabilitate and you know,
they do.
find the gold where you didn't think it was really there. So it could work out.
Right. And then last but not least, Ben Simmons fully cleared, to go. So he's basically all set, and he's getting ready to, have a monster year possibly. Well,
Uh,
that's it for today's episode of
yeah,
Off Ball.
yeah. Thanks.
Again, let us know your thoughts on the Minnesota Timberwolves and New York Knicks deal with Karl Anthony Towns, Julius Randle, and DiVincenzo. Who do you like it more for, or do you not like it for either team? Let us know in the comments, and we'll read it at the beginning of next episode. And also, again, just last but not least, NBA Media Day. Right by the time this episode comes out, Media Day will have already started. So if that's something you're interested in, right, you should give it a watch because it's always kind of fun, to see and look at what a lot of these players and coaches will say going into the NBA season, because this is the time where everybody's usually pretty optimistic. Unfortunately, we won't see the Knicks and Minnesota guys show up, right? Because obviously that deal isn't official yet. So we'll see the other peripheral players, but we want to hear from those guys, but we won't be able to. But I'm kind of curious to see what some of these teams will say ultimately. But either way, keep in mind the season's getting ready to start. Preseason's going to be here on Friday, and we'll continue to have some more NBA discussions and talk. Ready on this channel. So check it out. Continue to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next episode.